fourth week, the first session where we're going through, I'm sort of reviewing because we pretty much covered most of the points, but we've covered sometimes rapidly. And so today I've got a number of things I can bring in a different way of focusing. And so I've got a range of especially PowerPoints. I've not used them very much so far. It's a way of bringing in some things that are more concrete and specific, which is a good complement of the more abstract. Is point one. Point two, Wednesday we'll have a review for the exam, and next Monday is the exam, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah.
I think so. Anyway, that's midterm exam, first session, week 5, covers parts 1 of the syllabus. Any and all questions are welcome. Let me maybe hesitate right at the beginning. One thing which would be an obvious kind of question is, what are some of the big points in each of these big sections, big theories, big perspectives? We have roughly 5. Leadership, markets, national versus local, global, which we were just talking about, where and why. Then the political culture along with migration and ethnic history. 4th, urban innovation. 5th can be consumption and urban scenes, and then either part of that, or I'll often sometimes talk about it as a separate section of really on the rise of the arts as a sub-theme within consumption. Okay, so those are the big points in a sense where they're up. Can you, each of you, for instance, have something important and maybe distinctive or counterintuitive, which it conflicts with what you felt about before or what many people still say in each of those 5 areas? Want to try? Want to take 1 or 2? How about let's go through all these 5 really quickly, and let's try to get something interesting, different. And I've tried to, as you know, in each of these areas, I've tried to say there ought to at least be one table, one book, one picture which gives you something like that. That's not to say we should end there, but at least, and let's see if we can come up with some things that might be different, maybe the same, but if there's something different which you've seen in your own readings or thinking about it or heard about it, or there's something which doesn't seem to fit, which is happening in the news now, or that you've just learned about. Please raise your hand. Go ahead. Tell us your. Yeah, actually, can we have a couple of masks, please? At least one person had a bad cold, and so that our rule is if anybody's coughing, please do not come to class. But if people still, if you know you've got a cold or flu or something like we just don't know often at the beginning, then please try to cover your nose. Okay. So go. So he's first or second. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about the theme of kind of the decline in people joining civic organizations, and kind of how, to some extent, that can explain like a lack of trust amongst people today, and like part of the rise in like polarization politically.
I'm sorry, I missed the word. What politically?
Like a rise in political polarization that we can see today. So we talked about the McCarthy example.
Yes.
But like broader arguments for like populism or Trumpism can kind of be linked back to that.
Right. Good points indeed. Yeah, I mean, so that these are contemporary events, whereas Robert Putnam, I guess, when in his book Bowling Alone, can be seen as at least a strong, visible book, which made that very argument. But he drew many quotations and examples, so it's by no means unique to him. But would you want to say anything about what's surprising or distinctive, or that is, or just seeing the numbers from some of this, or whatever?
Like, what exactly do you mean by like surprising?
Did you learn anything in that section you hadn't known before you had the course?
Yeah, I guess I didn't understand it to be like such a historical phenomenon. Like I thought it was relatively recent insofar as kind of the decline in trust, but it seems like you can kind of trace it back to being like a 50, 60-year-old problem that kind of starts with the rise of
Why don't one
globalization.
of you, John, I'm interrupting, while you're talking, if anybody want to quickly go look at their machine, look at Robert Putnam. I think it's his most recent book, and it's got a cover which shows down and then up, and
The upswing.
the upswing. Why don't you just introduce this and for all of us to listen to it, and then join it with what we've heard. Go ahead. Is there an abstract of the book?
The upswing, the caption is how America came together a century ago and how we can do it again. Here's the review. From the author of Bowling Alone and Our Kids, a sweeping yet remarkably accessible analysis that offers superb, often counterintuitive insights to demonstrate how we have gone from an individualistic I society to a more communitarian we society, and then back again, and how we can learn from that experience to become a stronger, more unified nation. I can keep, there's a sort of a,
Okay, no, that's great. I mean, that's the summary of the main result. What are the data? What's also striking and interesting? He's really got one word. So let's listen carefully.
deep and accelerating inequality, unprecedented political polarization, vitriolic public discourse, a framed social fabric, public and private narcissism. Americans today seem to agree on only one thing.
This is smokescreen in a sense. The empirical part of this book is one word. Let's try to find that. So scroll down a little more. He's measured the counts of the number of uses of that word over the 20th century and the 19th century and the 21st century. Okay, can you see that there?
I don't believe so.
It ought to be there.
During the Gilded Age of the late 1800s, this is Amazon, so.
Yeah, that's fine. That should be there.
During the Gilded Age of the late 1800s, America was highly individualistic, starkly unequal, fiercely polarized, and deeply fragmented, just as it is today. However, as the 20th century opened, America became, slowly, unevenly, but steadily, more egalitarian, more cooperative, more generous, a society on the upspring, more focused on our responsibilities to one another and less focused on our narrower self-interests. Sometime during the 1960s, however, these trends reversed.
Okay. Well, the text which you're reading, which he wrote, mainly came from Bowling Alone. He's got an empirical analysis, which is the cover of the book, and if you could click on it, you could start to look at an actual that's great. We've got the chair's still open. Tom?
Yeah, is it like I or we?
That's what I would.
Yeah, because based on like the cover.
Maybe.
Shall I continue? In a magnificent and visionary book, drawing on his inimitable combination of statistical analysis and storytelling, Robert Putnam analyzes a remarkable confluence of trends that brought us from an I society to a we society and back again. He draws on inspiring lessons for a time from an earlier era when a dedicated group of reformers righted the ship, putting us on a path to becoming a society once again based on community. This is Putnam's most remarkable work yet, a fitting capstone to a brilliant career. End of caption.
Good. Can you click and get to the text? So it's not there yet.
Read sample.
Yes, okay. Don't just read to us. Read for yourself until you find the measures that he's using that are shown on the cover of the book. And we'll see if we have anything here, but if we got, that is, it's fine to bring out controversy, different sensitive results contingent on how you specifically measure or reconceptualize these kinds of things. So we don't want to spend too much just on one, but anyone else? We're trying to follow up with something interesting and distinctive within each of the 5 sections of the 5 or 6 sections.
Well, there's a chart here. It looks like the one on the cover, and there's four measures: economics, politics, society, and culture.
That's the whole world. There's some specific words that are
Community
in there.
versus
If you,
individual.
but don't tell us all. Spend a little more time researching it until you find it. It's there. How about markets? We didn't spend that much time about. The main thing we had was that table from Saskia Sassen, and the weaknesses that people have pointed to her, and I pulled them together and tried to do I'll add one more point here. One thing I've done several times, including right there, was what we call boxes and arrows. I've mentioned that briefly. I can send something out, but how much are you finding those useful or confusing or whatever compared to a normal full text question?
Sorry, common man. Is
So,
that it?
well, what's it say there? That is, you ideally may find a table, which at the bottom of the table would say, here are the words. And where do they come from?
I can't access the entire book, and I scanned through it, and I didn't find that. I scanned through the example. But on NPR it says, Putnam and Garrett searched American books post-1880 for terms like survival of the fittest. That term faded through most of the 20th century, only to win a new lease on life in the 21st century. The cultural salience of terms like association, cooperation,
Okay, now here we go. Terms like
association, cooperation, socialism rose from 1880, peaked around 1970, and declined thereafter. Use of the term common man rose steadily from 1880 to a peak in the late 1940s and plunged shortly thereafter.
Okay, that's what we're looking for. That's great. So what he's done is choose some individual words, and he's found a huge data file. If you can maybe even find it because it wasn't in what you read at the beginning. But that's the driver of the book. That is, it's in that sense, it's the opposite of the title Bowling Alone, in the sense that he's saying it was more individualistic, and now we're finding more we is returning if we look at certain kinds of specific things. And he most of all is looking for certain sub-areas and forecast, maybe not forecasting so much as saying, if we do more of this, then we can build more of a sense of we, the community, the social responsiveness and so forth. And so in that sense, that's a curve. In this sense, a U-shaped curve is the opposite of the linear decline, moving toward individualism and the end of society. And so, for instance, if you want to look just at increasing education or income or occupation, we might find in general we should find that people would become more individualistic. But he's showing no. And so that is what he can do is you can call them stories, but he's very thoughtful in choosing these to link them to bigger theories and to bigger processes, such as his book on Italy and contrasting the north and the south of Italy, which we talked about in this sense, is very well done in that regard. So my point is, so I'd make a couple of other related points. It's multi-method. He's not putting all of his cards, all of his money on one method that is many journal articles will use one data source, such as a national opinion, a national citizen survey, or one census result, and then say this is the finding, this is life. Whereas what he's done is saying, first, we have a rise of the common man at the end of the 19th century, it goes down, then it comes back up again, etc. Those are multiple stories, and it's harder to interpret that kind of U-shaped curve than to a linear trend of either any of those three, up, flat, or down. So, he also, I've heard him talk at many events, small groups, and sessions here at the University of Chicago when he's come out with some things. He sent me book drafts before they were published, and then with big groups especially the American Political Science Association meetings. He's often been very emotional, openly talking about how important these are things in which we must change society. But in that sense, he's not a cool observer. He hopes very actively that we can move away from a strong individualism, and he talks about how the fact that we no longer have bowling leagues, which he grew up with and loved participating. Instead of people are just bowling alone, which reinforces a stronger individualism. That's the simple story. But he then can bring in and does bring in a number in other books along. That is, he's done another book, for instance. It's almost on one city. It's really several chapters, but it's especially about Portland, Oregon. And Portland has a particularly collegial. It has the Intel computer company has a lot of staff there and has increased it in those years, and he has a lot of discussion with the people who the corporation as well as that city reinforce the same values and perspectives of friendly, participatory. The ideal. I wouldn't call it quite Disney heaven as one of our types, but it moves in that. It moves in that direction, but it's also totally qualitative. Whereas this book is really multi-dimensional, multi-methodological, and thus brings in many more. I would say more of a compliment I would make on him, and for you to hear that, as I'm critical of many things which he's done. He has another book on religion. It's a very fat book, done with a co-author, former student of Harvard, co-authors now on faculty at Notre Dame, and it's on. I'm blocking on the title right now, but it's a very subtle, thoughtful analysis, even though it says about religion, but it's 90% about politics. Religion linked with and connecting with many aspects of politics in very, very subtle ways, which have all kinds of things. So that is, he can write a simplistic paper, a simplistic book, but he can also write a very subtle, nuanced kind of book as well. Okay, so these overlap with multi-methods, types of leadership, types of civic activities, and these so that is, it cross-cuts several sections of the course. How about in markets? That is, we haven't talked about either Paul Peterson or Janet Abulagad. Anybody have any thoughts on either of them? Like to bring them in? Would you want to mention our brief discussion of Cairo, Egypt?
I think if I had another point about the Peterson meeting, now that I'm remembering it more, is that like his main thesis is that like the taxpaying consumer is like unsatisfied by high taxes.
Could we close a little bit the window so that I think we're really going to free some of you. But, yeah, that's good. So it's good it's good to bring and have more clothes you can bring so you can choose and put them on, take them off, as I often do during a meeting or whatever. But we can also adjust it with the temperature and especially the wind. But I think the wind is the wind blowing on you or going the other way?
It's fine now.
Okay. Sorry.
So they could just like move away and like if they're unsatisfied with high taxes.
Yeah. Do you want to aim around?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like a simplistic thesis and like it kind of assumes
Careful, the edges about that's good.
it assumes a certain type of taxpayer that has the flexibility to just like make the move.
We'll slow. And different types of what?
Like it assumes like a certain specific type of taxpayer who has the flexibility to be able to move to the suburbs to first like afford that move. Like for some people just paying higher taxes like is the easier choice for them than having to put down like a mortgage on a house or like in the suburbs. And it's just like it feels like he simplifies that decision that people will just like move away if or like be repelled by these high taxes. So.
Wait, I missed. Why is he simplifying?
Because like this proposition that the taxpayers or
The tax what?
the taxpaying consumer.
I'm just trying to each word just to speak a little slower and clearer.
Okay, that the taxpaying consumer is sort of can be turned away like when cities try to invest locally, like or like rely on local taxes for specific redistributive policies.
So how and why does he introduce the taxpayer and migration decision? Can I help you with something?
So I have a question for you. What do suburbs look like in Egypt? Like, are they like?
Suburbs are very much like they're gated communities, and they're very expensive to live in, and the whole point of them is to be away from the city, while still like enjoying the privileges of working in cities, like especially because most bigger enterprises, most corporations, most governmental entities are based in Cairo, but people then move to the suburbs, and then like but what happens is like with these gated communities, like they take the jobs away with them, essentially. So like now we have the thing where like everything is moving away from Cairo toward the suburbs.
And these are single family homes, right?
Yeah, single family. So
Why is the migration important in terms of the markets and the kinds of Can anyone mention, and let's just introduce in this discussion, the three issues which he discusses and why they're theoretically important? Can anyone raise that from the back here today? And that would be a good exam question, for example. What are the three types of Peterson that Peterson uses and why are they important? Can anybody answer that from the top of your head? Yeah. Okay. So it's an open book exam, so you can look it up during the exam, but you don't have that much time to look up everything for every question. So you've got to have some reasonable amounts of things in your head because the time is clearly limited. Okay, the three types.
Redistributive and allocative, and then
A little slower, a little clearer.
like redistribution and then allocation and
What's the second one?
allocation.
Allocation.
Allocation. Okay.
And what does that mean, or what's an example?
I think like an example that was mentioned is like sort of allocating certain amenities to certain areas, so like a police force or like public libraries, healthcare facilities.
Okay. That's the second. What's the third?
Can I look at my notes?
Economic development.
Economic development.
So, okay. And what are these three types and why are these important? That is, it could just sound descriptive, just off a table or whatever. But he builds a theory from this. 2 or 3 important points. He has invented none of these. That is, many of these came more from Robert Dahl, as I mentioned it briefly. Robert Dahl talked about the idea of issue areas change the politics, the dynamics, the participants, and where and how things work out. That is, so he has 3 examples in who governs are, who can mention that. Just to illustrate these, what are issue is and why are they distinctive. One was economic development, which is the same as Peterson. The second is schools and school board and PTA and things like that. And third is the election of the mayor. So they're not the same as Peterson, but the key point there, I mean, there are many points in Donald, but on the the issue area is one thing. Peterson uses the term arena, which is a different label of the same thing as issue area. Robert Musgrave is an economist, public economist at Harvard, and he had basically the same 3 types as Peterson, and just moderate. That is, he has a little more complicated, different sort of text, whereas Peterson is more of a government, politics, political science analyst here. The big point was to join these 3 types with the types, the rules of the game. That's what's important. That is, if you shift it, so the way he writes it, at least, the driver, the cause of these things changing depends on which kind of arena you're in. And so if you're in the redistribution arena, you're thinking, and he published an important book on Chicago schools. So he knows the details of schools. And where the money comes from, where it is spent, and so forth. And I'll if we look at the area of schools and ask within it, how about people who have lower in income or who have special needs, if you will, if they're deaf or they're blind or they they're mentally in difficulty. That is, they tend to go to either sometimes special classes or certain kinds of sessions before, in addition to the other classes. That is, these are very expensive. Who pays for these? National, state, or local in the U.S. and in general?
Local?
No. Okay, that's the big point. So, I mean, the point is, you may have gone through the American, primary, high school, public school system, but you may not know, and sometimes often you will have, the mayor often takes credit for the good things and says the other levels are the causes of the problem, whereas we're trying to make it better here. But in fact, here's the big money for redistribution in schools, and in terms of the absolute amount, what's the biggest spending area in all local governments in the U.S.? Schools. I mean, it's more than 50% of local expenditures is schools, and some of the most expensive specific activities are oriented toward the poor, and so they are paying for extra classes for people who get more professionals, more psychiatrists, more counselors, etc. And the politics, in addition to what I'm mentioning briefly, is related to the migration point. That is, if you say, for instance, the schools, one of the most visible, active political participants in Chicago is the Chicago Teachers Union, CTU. And the president of the CTU would have run as mayor and could well have beaten Rahm Emanuel as mayor at the end of his first 4 years recently, because Rahm Emanuel he alienated so many neighborhood parents that the neighborhood schools, about 20 schools, were closed in Chicago, and so he then went on the talk show session with National Public Radio for roughly an hour, and I listened to it, and it was amazing. And he said all kinds of things that were very politically incorrect. And so he would say, I was raised as a Jew. We felt that we and many Jews felt we were discriminated against in terms of certain personal relationships, but if we did well in school, we could get better positions in life, and we could achieve more, and we could think more thoughtfully. And schools have been critical for helping the disadvantaged in general. And if we don't let this continue and improve, especially the disadvantaged in Chicago, we will be one of the worst things that we could be doing to hurt the disadvantaged. So I'm saying this in a very calm, thoughtful sort of way. I mean, he was very, very emotional, and saying it. That is, he didn't say, I'm doing this because I want to win election or anything like that. He probably lost a lot of votes by saying it so emotionally, and because what percentage of Chicago citizens are Jews? I don't know, but it's probably less than 5%. Whereas, so in terms of neighborhood and Catholic neighborhoods, with the idea of the community is very strong. That is, the political culture of Chicago is much more based on the Roman Catholic Church and their schools and their playgrounds, their Sunday sessions, their teas, their parties, their concerts, all kinds of things which bring people together. And that sense of the social relationships are very distinctive. Okay, so what we're doing here is discussing the redistribution point of Peterson. And the big point is, if you try to redistribute even though it may sound and wasn't, it's seriously being debated here in Chicago. Well, the mayor, what was the last job of the mayor before he was mayor? Brendan Johnson.
County commissioner, and lobbyist for the CTU.
Okay. Lobbyist and social activist, social organizer, fundraiser, but especially neighborhood rally organizer for the teachers union. I've talked to many teachers in the last decades. Many people are idealist young persons who want to help younger kids, especially the more disadvantaged, who want to work in the Chicago public schools. The Chicago public schools are among the worst in the entire U.S. in terms of test scores, standard achievement, and so forth. So try to make it better is what many people go on, like the University of Chicago. The most popular activity as a civic activity, this is a Putnam, a bowling kind of, alone kind of question. What is the most popular activity of college students in the entire U.S. and on this campus? Football, cheerleaders, basketball, fraternity parties, drinking? No. You're smiling.
No, I thought it was drinking.
Okay. So you don't have a clue. Nobody has an idea you want to even guess. Okay.
Maybe like volunteering in schools, I'm guessing.
Yes, exactly that. They're served either in a school or helped tutoring, helping kids with their homework, helping them with reading things, or reading anything which is difficult. USC elite students are helping the poorest students in the poorest schools in Chicago. This is the favorite activity, and this is the same across the United States. All right, this is not Putnam's selfishness, but it is redistribution in that sense. It's trying to help the disadvantaged in ways that probably we could seriously help. Okay. So Peterson then says, why don't we then just spend more through the city of Chicago? Why don't we pay more through more taxes, hire more teachers, why don't we pay students to be mentors and do more of these kinds of things? And the answer to Peterson is?
It costs too much money.
A little louder?
It costs too much money.
But that's too simple.
Because it's unequally redistributed. Like in a sense, the community that needs it the most are not like the community that receives the most.
Maybe, but that could be a normative, bringing in a normative view that they should be helped more. What he's making could be linked with what you said about Cairo. What does he say about redistribution generally and about schools? I mean, if you don't even have a clue of this is very important. Okay. You talked about rich people. That is, you have no poor. That is asked. Let me ask for those of you who know other American suburbs anywhere in the U.S. or in the Chicago area. How much is the suburbs higher in income? In general.
In general, in Chicago, none whatsoever.
Okay, but elaborate. That's a very important point. Why don't you elaborate that a little bit?
Well, taking the suburbs to mean a municipality that's in the Chicago area, but is not the city of Chicago. The median income for a household, the median per capita income is $40,000, and in the city it's $39,000. And that's because stereotypically you'd think the suburbs are wealthier, But in the 21st century, a lot of suburbs like Cicero are working class, blue collar, and a lot of parts of the city like Lincoln Park have become high income. So that disparity is kind of like.
I mean, so your big simple point is there are many kinds of suburbs, and if we take an average, that tells us nothing. That's what you want to look at is something like a standard deviation. That is how much variability is there, and are there as many rich people and rich suburbs as there are poor suburbs. Many of the western suburbs and the southern suburbs are heavily African American and Mexican and much lower in income. In Bronzeville, where I live, is a 99% African American neighborhood for the whole 20th century. But many of the poorer people are moving out, and they're moving to the suburbs because the price of housing has gotten too high, even if the tax rate is the same anywhere if you live in other neighborhoods of Chicago. So Peterson's conclusion from this is, his theoretical point is, if you try to redistribute at the local level, you will drive away the affluent. That is, if you pay for you pay for these extra activities, you can drive people to go to just, that is, if it's easy for them simply not to leave their work, their job, but to move to a suburb, but so that is and okay. I don't want to spend too much more just on this one point, but you ought to know these. You ought to know these things. These are simple descriptive dynamics, linking the rules of the game. And in that sense, it's a good illustration of doing this, and with concrete examples in each of these three issue areas, these three arenas he calls them. There are big stories about where, and so his story is the rules of the game within each of those three big domains substantially change how and why the rules of the game work. So for redistribution, what he basically says, in general, because it fails, if you're a thoughtful mayor and civic activist or whatever, journalist, editorial writer, civic leader, smart advisor, whatever, don't try to do redistribution locally, because it's too easy just to move a little bit and get away. And so who should do this redistribution? He's not against redistribution. He wants more. He's a moderate, leftist Democrat. He wanted to have more redistribution, but his argument is the national government should do redistribution and then pass it down to the states, because the grants tend to be allocated. Many of the actual concrete particular programs are very different from state to state to state. So the states allocate the money down to the school, not to the city government, but to the school districts. They get the money, and those tend to be heavily the redistributed, poor-oriented school activities are funded in Washington, and the same is true in many other countries of the world. The entire public educational system is nationally funded. Whereas here, as you see, at this university, this is heavily, there's some big grants from the national government, but it's not a redistribution. I shouldn't say that. There definitely are redistributed funds from the government, but there's a lot more which is raised here by trustees, by funders, by charitable activities, and so forth. But let's push on. 3 issue areas, that's redistribution. The second one is allocational, which is basically the politics and the rules of the game are people want to have more for their neighborhood, not necessarily narrowly and selfishly, but at least they're seen in terms of where should the police be allocated? And the basic results of which many people have shown is the middle income gets less. That the people tend to get more money, tend to be a downtown tourism, Michigan Avenue, Fifth Avenue, kind of downtown area. But most of all, the poorest area where they have higher crime tend to get many more of the police, because the police go where there are more criminals and problems going on there. So in terms of the allocation of those police squads and so forth, are a classic and very expensive not redistribution. It's a bipolar kind of thing. The economic development issue area, who can answer what are the rules of the game there and why? Who are the key actors, which he's stressing? Business, banks, developers, investors. These are the people whose lives are spending big. I mean, they're putting in the millions and millions of dollars for big projects. Where China is doing this in a massive way. That is, China's is having serious financial problems right now because they have massive amounts of they're quasi-private corporations, but they are monitored and they're controlled, they're regulated in different ways by the national government. But the money often comes from the local government. So the Chinese local governments will help the developers to build more housing, to build more swimming pools, to build more schools, nicer parks. But these tend to become very expensive, and if the interest rates go up, as has happened in the last year, this can lead the local government and the housing companies to go bankrupt. And these have missed their payments. We can't say that they're bankrupt, but they've defaulted on their loans in ways, and this is hundreds of millions of dollars, and to such a degree that people around the entire world are concerned, because China is such a big economic player, that this can hurt people in Africa or Latin America, whatever. Okay, so these are the three rules of the game, basically. And that the simple point is, it's this powerful illustration of dolls. Issue areas have different rules of the game. Peterson pushes a little far, I would say. Yes, I would say he pushes too far, in the sense that he says it's not politics in the narrow, normal sense of speeches and let's say the appreciation which you may have for a charismatic character as a political candidate. Peterson plays up and says, no matter what your personality is, if you try to really redistribute substantially, people are going to move away from your city, and it may not happen within 2 years, but if there are many books that have gone into this. But Boston and New Haven were studied for doing a lot, and then of course New York. New York went bankrupt in the 1930s, and then in the 1970s twice. They basically, and so the state of New York and others seriously got involved in monitoring and regulating everything that New York City was doing, because they were regularly spending more money than they spent. Okay, so these we brought in. I'll just mention in a sentence or so. Janet Aboulegad, I'll say, she's most famous, by the way, if you don't know about her. It's called, I think, the Cairo, the 1,000 years of the city of Cairo. Okay, so okay, so she's a fan of Cairo. She writes about New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles and she takes very much Saskia Sassen's argument as a point of departure, but she basically says Saskia Sassen is wrong because Saskia Sassen has no politics and no culture. And the culture of these three cities are drastically different. So the kinds of things I'm saying about New York, in contrast to Chicago, Chicago has generally had fiscally conservative mayors, the Dailies. The Dailies, both Dailies would talk about being, we're good Democrats, we work nationally with the Democratic Party, et cetera, but they're fiscally conservative, and I did a study, I was consulting with Harold Washington. Harold Washington was particularly criticized by the press, and was saying, you know, we're driving people out from Chicago to move to the suburbs, they're going to leave Chicago altogether, businesses will leave, et cetera, because we have such high taxes. I looked at the data. We spent with some hardworking research assistants, we dug out a lot of numbers, and we add these things up, and then we did the same thing for the 10 largest cities, and compared those, which is hard because they have different labels for these things in different states. Where did Chicago rank compared to the 10 largest in population cities in terms of its total tax burden from the local government and then local and state?
No, sorry, I was just checking.
Okay. Anybody want to guess based on what I've said? Donald Hyder was the chief advisor of some of the other officials, including the Chamber of Commerce and some of the other civic groups in Chicago. And he was an advisor of the Democratic Party, the machine, if you will. Whereas I was advising officially with Harold Washington. So that at least led us to ask slightly different questions, but we, and so I would say we tried. I mean, I had no idea what the findings would be, except to try to find it out. So I was quite surprised to find the result that Chicago ranked of the 10 in terms of the tax burden which you would pay. 10th out of 10th. It's the lowest. It's the most fiscally conservative of the 10 cities from both the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. That is lower in tax burden than Houston, Dallas, and Phoenix, and San Diego. I mean, those are often seen as much more Republican, fiscally conservative than Chicago, but they get taxed more than in Chicago. Okay. Question, comment?
So he was gone before.
So
I'm sorry. No, but I was thinking, isn't it also due because, I don't know if it's Illinois or Chicago, the income tax is the same no matter your tax bracket? And doesn't that affect like the tax burden as a whole? For, I think it's income tax, right? It's the same no matter, for like local taxes, it's the same no matter how high your tax bracket is.
Is there an income tax in Chicago?
Oh, then it's what?
Illinois.
Sorry. Illinois.
Okay. No, but that's in terms of Peterson's argument, that's a very important point. That is, because there have been some cities like New York and Philadelphia that have had city income taxes. Yeah. Chicago has not. In part for the Peterson argument.
Yeah, sorry, between the no income tax in Chicago plus the low income tax in Illinois compared to other states.
So, well, what your one point may be right or wrong, but I would say the big point is that's a trivial issue. Okay. That is, if you look more closely at what we did, I mean, we did a 100-page report. What we did the next thing we did was to look at maybe 10 or 15. We looked at the average of all of the suburbs of all the counties in the surrounding area, of Chicago. But then we looked at extreme cases of particularly high and particularly low tax burdens and tax. And places that had the lowest tax burden were places like Schaumburg and Northbrook, because they had large malls and shopping centers, and they then raised their money for the city government, like Schaumburg, by having people pay sales taxes in the malls. And so people go there, they shop, they pay there, and the city government collects a high sales tax, and nobody pays any, at least at the time when we did the study, there were no property taxes at all. Chicago generally has, and this is part of the drivers here, Chicago has had very high, is a very strong convention city. A lot of people come here, a lot of money comes here, hotels, restaurants, etc. The travelers who are coming here to these conventions are taxed medium high in hotels and restaurants, but especially in sales taxes. So when they're shopping, they may be friends or on the weekend or whatever. This raises a lot of money, and the Michigan Avenue. This leads to reducing the property taxes substantially to Chicago, because the sales tax is not a tax on the residents, the citizens or the businesses that are local. Okay, so these,
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna ask. I thought that Donald Hyder was a Republican candidate for mayor at that point. I didn't know.
Yes, he was later on. He was building his candidacy. He worked. I think he was finance director under Jane Byrne, etc. But that was leading into all of this stuff. Okay. Let's push along as we're not getting this is 5:29. Political culture. We talked moderately about Daniel Elazar. We went over some of the themes of the new political culture, but the dramatic result was that you folks had invented, from the tops of your heads or your journalistic perusals or whatever, you invented many of the core propositions that are in the new political culture. When I asked the question, how can we explain the ouster of McCarthy in the national government, even though this is not a national government course at all, you put your finger very thoughtfully, and you filled up the board with about 13 propositions, and they have been stated as propositions, and then the other chapters are testing those. There's 7 or 8 books that are actually testing these propositions, because there are different kinds of data. We have mayors surveys, we have citizen surveys, we have the cities in the U.S., we have the city of Chicago with several studies that I've mentioned, and then international comparisons of 20 countries around the world. And we're still pursuing this. We talked a bit about Bourdieu and about the rich versus the poor, basically, and how it was crudely handled by Bourdieu, and how Maxime Jaffray has really presented a much more subtle way, and how the city of Marseille has been much more sensitive, and it's been much more a high immigration city through its whole 19th and 20th century. Lots of Mediterranean travel and visitors and people who are there permanently has led to policies and sensitivity. So Maxime Jaffray he's now teaching in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, even though he's a French citizen, and his PhD was on world music. That term I've now seen a little bit used in Chicago, but it's used much more in France to include often Muslim music along with classic West European kind of usually classical music. Okay, section D, urban innovation. A couple of anything we haven't talked about that anybody wants to either bring in or ask a question. There's one paper I have said virtually nothing about called Bohemian Cultural Scenes and Creative Development of Chinese Cities. Professor Chen, would you like to say anything about this paper? Yeah, I know you've been ill and doing other things, but if you would
No,
would you,
I listen to you. Yeah.
would you want to comment on this paper?
Bohemian cities, Chinese, something like that.
Bohemian cities and Chinese.
Yeah, it's the top of page 5 by Wu Jun. You and I talked about it briefly. I asked you if could you please look at it and let's talk about it, and then let's have a discussion of the paper in the class, but not that is not just the detail of China, but to try to link this to the rest of the course that we're covering here. Anybody want to participate on this? There's a longer than usual anecdote which may raise many other shared points which are important in other parts of the world. Okay. Let me raise a couple of things which I haven't raised so far, unless someone wants to either ask a question or participate. Where did the concept of bohemianism come into culture and in politics historically? Which country was most important?
France.
France. Who and what in France? There's one person whose name we could first name is Balzac, the novelist. Is the most important. Sorry?
Honoré de Balzac?
Honoré de Balzac. Why? He said the artists need to have freedom to think about anything which doesn't say you've got to do this or do that. You need to be able to be creative and to be artistic and have lots of rules of the game that you don't have to worry about. And you can dress or not. You can have different styles of drinking, of sleeping, of working, or doing this or that. And so he was very successful. I mean, he and Dickens in England, they made the novel into major, in terms of today, they would be multimillionaires because they were so widely read. They're okay. So, but the simple point I'm making now is Balzac said we should create a certain region, neighborhood within Paris where people can be bohemian, and it was then called Montmartre. It's up on a hill, and it was the major area for the artists and for bohemian lifestyle for the early to mid part of the 19th century. It continues on a bit, but it mostly was then. Later on in the later 20th century, aspects of it went back even much back further, but it was not. I don't want to mix too many things. except to say, I'm raising the issue of how much are artists also bohemian? Have we seen that in any of these other sources that we've looked at it? I'll give you the answer. No one's jumping forth with that. Is the book and several other the book and the paper. Richard Florida created a Bohemian Index, so-called, in his book, and then special and separate publications. And what was his index of bohemianism? It was a city-level measure. Sorry, metropolitan. He usually has analyzed metropolitan areas, not just the city government. But what he did was to count the number of artists, essentially. Their occupations, job occupations, which were artistic, such as painters, potters, sculptors, and then shops, which could include art museums, art galleries, places that sell artist supplies, theaters, costumes, all these kinds of things. He would count these either both in absolute terms and then as a percentage of all of the jobs within that metro area. And he said this is bohemianism. Okay, what's the problem with that? Okay, we haven't finished the earlier question, which is where did this originate? And we said, and the quick answer is Balzac, and we had the neighborhood in Paris. I'll try to. Okay. What we want to get to quickly is to say some artists were and are bohemian, but if you go to the Art Institute and ask the students or the faculty, would you consider yourself a bohemian or cool, or do people have red hair or green hair? Could we maybe move down the windows just a little bit? I can feel it blowing pretty hard over here, so it's going to be hard over there. What would people say if they were asked of artists, either from casual conversation or from national surveys which do this? The simple question is, are the artists bohemian?
Not all of them.
Okay. Not all of them. That's the right answer. Some are, and some may be very bohemian, like Balzac. But many are not, including people who work in advertising agencies, people who do web design. They may be computer scientists who are doing artistic kinds of things like this, and their hearts and minds may not be bohemian at all. Yeah.
So that would only measure like formal employment, right? So like if someone does this as like their side gig after work, like does paints, right? Like that wouldn't be considered, even though it could still be a bohemian activity.
Well, the stereotype is that many artists cannot afford to live on based on their work, especially if they're young and even they spend their whole lives. They're poor. They're poorer than most of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago with African Americans and so forth. They're poorer than graduates, PhD students at the University of Chicago. They get more to live on than do the artists in general. Richard Lloyd's book here is entitled Neo-Bohemian Ethnography of Chicago's Classic Arts and Neighborhood, Wicker Park. And as I added, the artists made it hot, but the prices rose, driving artists out. Okay. Rich Lloyd takes the argument of Florida even further. He says, if we want to be innovative and creative, you've got to be bohemian. So he makes Florida's, he makes even a more extreme version than Florida. I mean, he's a student here. We okay, I won't go into too much, except that I'm pointing to smart people who are digging for different ways of measuring this. So Lloyd did not do any statistical or quantitative analysis. He's an ethnographer. He talked to people in individual bars, bartenders, waiters, who are often artists in Wicker Park. And he has wonderful, powerful dynamics of how those work and lose their money, give it away, even though they should be getting it in their tips, etc. But the point is, by contrast, later work shows that the shopkeepers, people are selling clothes, people who are selling different kinds of art, certain kinds of restaurants and cafes which feature speakers and types of books which they sell. They are really maintaining a bohemian lifestyle and culture in the neighborhood called Wicker Park, very powerfully. Even though many of the artists have moved out because they can't afford it, and many people who move in are young stockbrokers, lawyers, computer programmers, but many of them are different, and so people will then talk, and we've got evidence on this. They do want to live there in ways that are different. For instance, that is, they don't move to Lincoln Park or an area that is simply known more by their income and affluence and attractive housing, but do not have, that is, Lincoln Park used to have a bit of a bohemianism, but the simple point is, Wicker Park was the classic artist neighborhood in the late 20th century, and is documented very, very well by Rich Lloyd. The couple of points from this now about bohemianism as a powerful kind of interpretation. How much is it explaining the ways? Whoops, we're 6 minutes away from the end here, so. What we're doing is reviewing the whole course, and we're doing one way of doing it is I'm talking more. We can try to have you maybe ask more questions on Wednesday, so it's not as if I'm encouraging dialogue if I can, but I hear that I'm doing more of the talking than the rest. But it can be different on Wednesday. The Bohemian story, to try to wrap this up. Many have tried to, so Rich Lloyd is a powerful example of saying artists are bohemian. This is really what makes them creative. You've got to be creative and break the rules of the normal bourgeoisie or the middle class or the stereotypical conformist kinds of business people, for instance. The Chinese paper basically uses the concept of bohemian very actively. And if we want to talk a little bit more maybe on Wednesday, we could do that. And think about it, where and how it fits with the rest of the course, with the examples and the readings that we've been talking about here. But I'm pointing to all of you to the fact that this paper about China takes the well-known concept of bohemianism from Balzac through the other American place was Greenwich Village, where Jane Jacobs, in her book, The Life and Death of Great American Cities, she really featured the creativity of Greenwich Village was related to the Balzac kind of argument that people could think and create more dramatically and with more success because they had a bohemian lifestyle. They didn't feel they had to follow up. Okay, so quick series of points. Well, yeah, I can't do this in 2 or 3 minutes. So I will simply, that is, I probably said 30 different things so far in the course, in all these sessions about artists, and there are many. I'm sort of giving you some of the arguments and the discussions among the participants here, but. Well, I'll end with one way of thinking about it. You have here readings from Richard Florida, me, Edward Glaser. Edward Glaser is a top urban economist in the world, trained here. He's been at Harvard for most of his career is on the faculty. Florida has taken a strong sort of bohemian kind of position as I've described. Glaser tends to be alienated from the bohemianism interpretation and I would say life, that is many sketches of his economics as well as his personal style. He wears 3-piece suits with nice shirts and bow and ties and the like, dressed formally and not in a bohemian manner. When Rich Florida was here in my class years before it was popular, he was there with half of his shirt on one side sticking out over his pants halfway down to his knees, and the other side was tucked in. Okay, so and this was at the point when most doctors, lawyers, businessmen, accountants, etc., all wore suits and ties. Okay, so my point is, we contributed chapters to a book on the city as an entertainment machine, and basically we had a strong argument that all three of us were exploring about how the artists and arts can make a difference. But where and how led to disagreements and looking more closely, including the role of gays. And so the specifics of gays and how much gays may have been bohemian were explored. So let's stop there. I've given you just enough to give you a flavor that these are important but also interesting and complicated to the degree that smart people have disagreed and come up with very different interpretations. Okay.